I have read over 50 Christian fiction books, and these are my top 10 favorites. These are all books that I just had an amazing experience reading, and they're the kind of books that I think everyone can enjoy at least some part of. And what's great about these books is that they all have some kind of biblical themes that help you learn a little bit more about God in the process of reading. These are all different types of books in different genres. Some of them are by some really famous authors you'll probably recognize, but there are also many books on this list that you've probably never even heard of before, which is why I'm so excited to tell you all about them. And I'm going to be saving my top 3 favorites on this list for last, so stick around for that. But book number 1 is called If I Run by Terry Blackstock. This is a thrilling book about a woman who gets blamed for her best friend's murder, and because of that, she has to go on the run. It's a really intense mystery book where she has to try and uncover who actually killed her best friend, while also trying to figure out how to flee and hide from the cops in the process. I think this book was specifically very special to me because it was one of the first Christian fiction books that I read that was actually really exciting and thrilling and had a great story, and it wasn't like boring or just like a cheesy romance that I feel like Christian fiction tends to be, or at least there's a stereotype that it tends to be that. This was the exact opposite. It was so exciting, such a fun story, and because of that, it's one of the first few books that got me really into this genre and made me really excited about discovering all the other great Christian fiction books out there. This is actually the first book in a series, but I specifically recommend the first one. This one was definitely my favorite. Also, I wanted to say that I know there's some Christian books that I talk about all the time, probably way too much, so this list is going to be a little bit different. I don't want it to just be a big repeat of all the books I talk about constantly, like for example all of my favorite C.S. Lewis books or East of Eden. I feel like you've all probably heard me talk about those books enough, so this is a list of my top 10 favorites that I haven't already talked about a million times before, but just remember I am still a huge C.S. Lewis fan even though they're not on this list. Well, there actually is one at the very end that I haven't talked about too much yet, but other than that there's no others, so now we can continue on with the list. The next book on my list is called A Time to Die by Nadine Brands. This was a super cool young adult story that takes place in a futuristic society where everyone in the society is born with a clock that tells them the exact date they're going to die. And the main character starts off the book knowing she only has 1 year left to live. And in the process of trying to do good and do the best she can in this last year of her life, she actually ends up getting banished from this society and sent outside of the city walls. And the majority of the story is her trying to survive out in the wilderness on her own as she slowly starts to realize how messed up the society she's from actually is. The title of this book, A Time to Die, actually comes from that verse in Ecclesiastes that's like, there's a time for everything, a time to be born and a time to die, which I thought was really cool. And one of the best parts about this book is that the main character slowly starts to discover more about what God says about death and how she doesn't need to fear it. And it was just a super fun story. This book kind of reminded me a little bit of The Hunger Games, and it just surprised me so much that a book like that could be a Christian book and could lead you closer to God in the process of reading it. That was a huge reason why I love this one. My next book is called The Librarian of St. Malo by Mario Escobar. I have always loved historical fiction, specifically World War II historical fiction, so when I discovered that there was a World War II historical fiction that was also a Christian book, I had to get it, and I pretty much knew that I was gonna love it. This is about a woman who's living in a French town called St. Malo, and it takes place over a long period of time as the war starts to pick up, and it goes through just like her entire life living through it. She works in the library in this town, and she's very upset when she finds out people are going to come and burn her books. And a lot of this book is about her risking her life and making a ton of sacrifices in order to save the books in her library and protect the knowledge that they have. I love the really strong main character in this book. She's also dealing with a chronic sickness throughout the majority of the story, and one of my favorite parts is seeing her go from being really scared about the war, thinking she's gonna die, being depressed because her husband is being deported, and just feeling like she can't do anything to save herself or to fix her life. Going from that to someone who's like super strong and risking her life to save these books is just a really satisfying transition to see. So if you like historical fictions, I would highly recommend this book. I've heard Mario Escobar does other Christian historical fiction, so I'm excited to hopefully read more of his stories soon. Okay, so now it's time to get into some of the really famous books by some really popular authors. One of the next 4 books happens to have been a New York Times bestseller for a really long time. It's probably been one of the most popular books of this entire year, and the fact that it's a Christian fiction is kind of crazy to me. I'm also gonna get into my favorite books from the most famous author on this list, Francine Rivers, so that's all in this next section, and then after that, I'm gonna get into my top 3 favorite books of this entire list, so make sure you stay for that because these last 3 books are amazing. So if you've read any Christian fiction before, you've probably heard about Francine Rivers. She is by far one of the biggest Christian fiction authors out there. She has so many books, she's been doing this for so long, and she's such a great writer. And because of that, I actually have 2 of her books on this list. And the first one is probably one of her most popular books. It's called A Voice in the Wind. Now, I do have to say off the bat, there were a few things that I did not love about this book. However, I think the pros of this book are so good to where I feel like I can just kind of ignore the cons. This book takes place during the Roman Empire, and it's about a Jewish girl whose family gets killed by all the Romans. Because of that, she is then sold into slavery, and she ends up working for this Roman family as a slave, and she becomes so integrated into this family's life and so well loved by all the family. And in this process of being a slave for this family, she's also trying really hard to maintain her faith in a place where faith like hers is so abnormal. Something that I think is so good about Francine Rivers' writing is that she always has so many main characters. They are all so well thought out and well written, and each have so many long, deep backstories and motivations for everything they do. Like, obviously this slave girl is the main character in the story, but when I think about this story, I think about all of the main characters. A book like this is just like a journey to go through. So anyway, I thought it would be a disservice to not mention A Voice in the Wind because I think a lot of you would probably really enjoy this book. And now it's time for my second Francine Rivers book because there are 2 that I just really enjoyed. So my second Francine Rivers book, I honestly think I might even like more than the other one. It's called The Last Sin Eater. Now, I have to warn you, this book is a little bit creepy in some places. So the main character of this book is actually only 10 years old, and the book starts off with her feeling really burdened and upset about a tragedy that happened before the book began. She blames herself for it, and more importantly, she believes she can never be forgiven for this sin she's committed. So it takes place a really long time ago in a small town in Appalachia, and this town all believes in a sin eater. And a sin eater is basically this man who lives up in the mountains, and anytime someone dies in this town, he comes down from the mountains and he does this like little ritual and he takes on the sins of the people who have died. But the main girl is really fascinated with this man because she's carrying so much weight from her sins, and she really wants someone like him to take them away from her. So she sets out on a journey to find him. This book is just such a great story about sin and forgiveness and the power of what Jesus alone can do for us. Anyway, it's just such a unique, kind of weird story to be honest, but so good at the same time. It's the next day and it's time to get to the second half of this list. Now the next one is probably one of the most popular books I have on this list. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list for a while. Anyway, I read it recently and I really loved it. It's called Theo of Golden by Alan Levi. This book is about a sweet elderly man named Theo who goes to the town of Golden. Kind of mysteriously, nobody really knows why he's there or what he's doing. But while he's there, he goes into a coffee shop where one wall is covered in hand-drawn portraits of different members of the town. They are for sale, and so he starts buying them each individually one by one, and he sets out on this mission to find who the portrait is of in the town and to go give it to them as a gift. It's such a like random, very unique story, and I'll be honest, before going into this book I was like, how is this going to be that interesting? And although it's not like the most exciting or thrilling book, you still get so much out of these interactions with Theo and different members of the town. They usually share a bunch about their backstory and their struggles, and slowly in the process Theo starts to kind of transform this entire community. There are a lot of biblical references in this book. Once you get to the end, you can really tell the overarching story really reflects the gospel. It's just such a sweet story about kindness and like loving your neighbor as yourself and all that. Again, this book is a little bit different from what I would typically like. It's a little bit slower, not as much suspense, but I think the fact that I did like this book, even though it's not the genre I would typically enjoy, says a lot. So I did really like this one. My next book is one that I read a little while ago, but it was so good. I still think about it now. It's called Mark of the Raven by Morgan L. Bouse. It's about a world where they have a bunch of different kingdoms and each dynasty has a special power. And the family or the house that the main character is born into all have the power of dream walking, which means you can go into other people's dreams and like manipulate them. Anyway, the main character eventually realizes that her family uses this power for evil to like manipulate other people to get what they want, and the main character is really unsettled by this. So it goes through the whole story of her sharpening these magical skills while also faced with a really big decision on what she wants to use this power for, whether she wants to go with what she's supposed to do and use it for evil, or if she wants to kind of change her fate and use them for good. Again, this is a younger YA book, but I read it as an adult and I really loved it. I thought the story was really unique and fun and very well written, and this is another one of those books that was just like a really fun time all around. Okay, we're getting into the final 3 books on my list. And like I said before, these are my top 3 of the entire list. So if you're gonna read any books on this list, I especially recommend these 3. Starting off with As Sure as the Sea by Jamie Ogle. I actually just read this book very recently, and in the video where I read it, I talked about how this book just perfectly hit the spot of what I was looking for at the time. This book takes place in Eastern Europe during the Roman Empire when Christianity is first starting to pick up, but it's not super normalized yet, and so the Christians in this book are very much targeted for their faith. The main character and her brother in this book are Christians, and they make a living diving down in the ocean to get coral and pearls, and they sell them for money. That being said, the setting of this book is amazing. Most of it is out on the ocean, and I love the whole theme of the main character having a lot in her past that she feels like she can never overcome or be forgiven from, and so it shows the whole process of her overcoming that and realizing who Jesus actually is and what he can do for her. The beginning of this story starts off so intense, and I felt like within the first few chapters I was already hooked, and I love a book that begins like that, so this one was really, really good. My second to last book is Confessions by St. Augustine. Now I must warn you, this book is very different from all the others. This is a very deep, very slow biography of St. Augustine's life, but it's told through a prayer to God, and as he goes back over his life all the way from before he was born until present day, he's looking back on different places in his life where he overlooked God at the time, but looking back he can recognize how present God really was and all the many things he did for St. Augustine that he didn't even acknowledge or appreciate at the time. So a lot of the book is him confessing past sins to God. This book also has so many amazing quotes. I ended up tabbing a lot of it because of that. I feel like I need to just read one to you so you understand how good it is. So there's this one that says, "By this means you form the offspring of our fallen nature, and with a gentle hand you prune back all the thorns that have no place in your paradise. For your almighty power is not far from us, even when we are far from you." I feel like that in general is a lot of what this entire book is about. Just recognizing how close God is and has always been to us, even when we didn't notice it ourselves. I feel like there's so much I could say about this book, but overall, you just need to read it to fully get it and understand it and to see how great it is. So definitely go pick this one up and try it out. Now, in the beginning of this video, I did say that I was not going to go into all of my favorite C.S. Lewis books because that would just take up the entire list. So I was going to set those to the side and give you some new recommendations. However, there is one C.S. Lewis book that I read very recently that I really, really loved, and I figured I could at least put one on this list. And it is the last book because it's probably my favorite of this entire list, and it is called The Great Divorce. Before going into it, I had heard that this book was very convicting for Christians, and that was so true because there's so much in this book that makes you think about yourself, and it really exposes some of your selfish desires or pride that can get in the way of your relationship with God. So the book is one big allegory about a group of people who are supposedly in hell, which is depicted as this very depressing gray town. And in this gray town, a bus shows up and gets everyone inside and drives them straight to heaven. So everyone goes straight to heaven, everyone gets let off the bus, they can experience it, do whatever they want, and then in a little bit, the bus is going to go back to the gray town. And everyone who wants to go back can get back on the bus and leave. And when I first found that out, I was like, why would anyone get back on the bus and go back when they've experienced heaven? Like, why would they ever want to leave? But it's so interesting to follow these people and figure out the reasons why they don't really want to stay in heaven and why they really want to get back on the bus and go back. And I think when reading this book, I expected the people who were in the gray town to be horrible people, but what was really kind of scary is that none of them were that bad of people. At least they weren't on the surface and what you could see. These people were simply just really prideful and really selfish, but in super subtle ways, and almost more concerningly in ways that you see other people acting around you on a daily basis. So if you're not going to read any of the others, I would say definitely try this one out now. So those are some of my top favorite Christian fiction books that I've read. Let me know if you've read any of these, and if so, what did you think of them? And also feel free to give me any recommendations on books you think I should read next.